Hello, it's Mrs. Hatrick here. I am just about to read you one of my favourite stories for World Book Day. This is by a great author that you'll all be familiar with. It is Michael Morpurgo. And this book is called This Morning I Met a Whale. Now, I chose this book for two reasons. One of the reasons is that I believe passionately in environmental issues, and this has got a really strong environmental theme about saving the planet and looking after the beauty that we have on this earth. And also I chose this book because it's illustrated by an amazing illustrator called Christian Birmingham. And the illustrations in here are quite beautiful. You can see very well there. Absolutely beautiful. So it's a book really to be cherished. So this morning I met a whale. This morning I met a whale. It was just after 5 o'clock and I was down by the river. Sometimes when my alarm works and when I feel like it, I get up early because I like to go bird watching, because bird watching is my favourite hobby. I usually go just before the first light. Mum doesn't mind, just so long as I don't wake her up and just so long as I'm back in time for breakfast. It's the best time. You get to hear the dawn chorus. You get to see the sunrise and the whole world waking up around you. That's when the birds come flying down to the river to feed, and I can watch them landing in the water. I love that. There he is. Can you see it going down? This is in London. I think that's Battersea Bridge. He's going down to the water's edge. If you're already there when they come, they hardly notice you, and then you won't bother them. Hardly anyone else is down at the river at 5 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes no one at all, just the birds and me. The rest of the world is asleep. Well, mostly anyway. From our flat in Battersea, it takes about 5 minutes to walk down to the river. The first bird I saw this morning was a heron. I love herons because they stand so still in the shallows. They're looking for fish, waiting to strike. When they strike, they do so fast, it's like lightning. When they catch something, they look so surprised and so pleased with themselves, as if they've never done it before. When they walk in slow motion. When they take off and fly, they look prehistoric, like pterodactyls almost. Herons are my best, but soon enough they all came, all the other birds, the moorhens, the coots, the crested grebes and the swans, the cormorants and the ducks. This morning I saw an egret too, perched on a buoy out on the river, and you don't see many of those. They're quite like a heron, but actually much smaller and white, snow white. He was so beautiful. I couldn't take my eyes off him. I was watching him through my binoculars and he was looking right back at me. It was like he was asking me, "Hey you, what are you doing down here? This is my river, don't you know?" Suddenly, without a warning, he lifted off. Then they all lifted off, all the birds on the shore, all the birds in the river. It was very strange. It was just as if I'd fired a gun or something, but I hadn't. I looked around. There wasn't a single bird anywhere. They'd all disappeared. And for a while, the river was completely still and empty and silent. It was like it was holding its breath, almost waiting for something to happen. I was doing the same. Then I spotted something slicing slowly through the water towards me. It was a fin. Shark? I thought, shark? And a warm shiver of fear crept up my back. Then I saw a head, and I knew at once it couldn't be a shark. It was more like a dolphin, but it wasn't. It wasn't quite the right shape. It was too long and too big for a dolphin. It was big enough to be a whale, a real whale. Now, I knew what it was with a face like that. I knew At once, it must be a bottle-nosed whale. It's the only whale that's got a face like a dolphin. I know quite a lot about whales because my uncle sent me a whale poster that he got in a newspaper, and I've got it pinned on my bedroom, just above my bed. So that's why I recognised it. I know all about whales: narwhals, belugas, sperm whales, pilot whales, minkies, bottlenose, the lot. To begin with, I just stood there and stared. I thought I was still dreaming. I couldn't take it in. I couldn't believe my eyes. I mean, a whale in the Thames, in Battersea. He was close to the shore now, in a shallower water, and still coming towards me. I could see almost all of him, from his head all the way down to his tail. But after a bit, I could see he wasn't really swimming anymore. He was just lying there in the shallows, puffing and blowing a bit from time to time. He must be just resting, I thought, tired out after his long journey, perhaps. And then I noticed that he was watching me as hard as I was watching him, almost like he was trying to stare me out. Except I could tell from his gentleness in his eyes that he wasn't being unfriendly towards me. He was interested in me, that's all, as I was interested in him. That's when I knew, don't ask me how, I just knew that he wanted me to come closer to him. There's a picture of a little boy down. There's the whale just coming into focus there. Beautiful illustration. I climbed the wall and ran along the shore. The tide was already going out fast. I could see at once that he was in great danger. If he stayed where he was, he'd soon be stranded. I was walking slowly so not to alarm him. Then I crouched down as close as I could get to him, and the water lapping all around me. His great domed head was just out of reach. We were practically face to face, eye to eye. And his eyes that seemed to be able to look right into me. He was seeing everything I was thinking. I was sure that he was expecting me to say something first, so I did. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "You're a bottlenose whale, aren't you? You shouldn't be here at all. You don't belong in the Thames. On my whale poster, it says you live in the North Atlantic somewhere. So you should be up there, near Iceland, near Scotland maybe, but not down here. I've seen bottlenose whales on the telly too, on the planet Earth, I think it was. There were lots of you all together. Maybe it was a pilot whales, I can't actually remember. But anyway, you always go around in schools, don't you? In huge family groups. I know you do. So how come you're all alone? Where's the rest of you? But maybe you're not all alone. Maybe some of your family came with you and you got yourself a little bit lost. Is that it?" He kept staring back at me out of his big wide eyes. I thought the best thing I could do was just keep talking. I couldn't think of what else to do. For a moment or two, I didn't know what else to say. And anyway, I suddenly felt a bit stupid talking to him. I mean, if somebody was watching me. Luckily, though, there was no one about. So instead, I looked up the river, back towards Battersea Bridge, to see if any of his other family might have come with him. But everywhere the river was empty and glassy and still. There was nothing there, nothing that broke the surface anyway. He was all alone. He'd come alone. And that was when it happened. The whale spoke to me. His voice was like an echoing whisper inside my head, like a talking thought. But it was not him talking. It was, "I promise you." "No," he said, "my family is not with me. I'm not on my own. They came some of the way with me, and they're waiting for me back in the sea. And you're right, we usually stay close to our families. It's safer that way. But I had to do it. I had to do it all alone. Grandfather said it would be best. Grandfather would have come himself, but he couldn't, so I've come instead. Everyone said it was far too dangerous, that there was no point, that it's too late anyway. People won't listen. They just won't learn, no matter what. But Grandfather knew differently. He always said that I should go, that time was running out. But there was still hope. I was young enough and strong enough to make the journey, he said. One of us had to come and tell you, so I came. There are some things that are so important that you just have to do them. Whatever anyone says, however dangerous it might be, I believe that. And besides, I promised Grandfather before he died, I promised him I'd come and find you. And I always keep my promises. Do you keep yours? I could just about manage to nod. But that was all. I tried, but I couldn't speak a word. I thought maybe I'd gone completely mad, seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices that weren't real. And suddenly, that really terrified me. That's why I backed away from him. I was just ready to run off when he spoke again. It's all right, he said. Don't be frightened. I want you to stay. I want you to listen to me. I've come a very long way to talk to you, and I haven't got long. His tail thrashed suddenly, showering me with water, and it actually made me laugh. But then I could see it was serious. He was rolling from one side to the other, rocking himself violently. Now I saw that what he was struggling to do. He was trying to back himself into deeper water, struggling to keep himself afloat. I wanted to help him, but I didn't know how. All I could do was stand there and watch from the shore. It took him a while before he was out into deeper water and able to swim free again. He was blowing hard. I could tell that he'd given himself a right fright. He swam off into the middle of the river and then just disappeared completely under the water. I stood there for ages and ages, looking up and down the river. He could have gone anywhere. I was longing for him to surface, longing to see him again, worried that he may never dare risk it again. But he did. Though when he came towards me this time, he kept his distance. Only his head was showing now, and just occasionally his fin. I've got to watch it, he said. The tide is going out all the time. Grandfather warned me about it. They all warned me. Stay clear of the shore, they told me. Once you're beached, you're no good as dead. You're as good as dead. We can breathe all right out of the water. That's not the problem. But we need the water to keep us afloat, to float in. We can't survive long if we get stranded. We're big, you see, too heavy for our own good. We need water all around us to survive. If we're not afloat, we soon crush ourselves to death. And I don't want that to happen, do I? Maybe I just got used to him speaking to me like this. I don't know. Or maybe I just wanted to hear more. Either way, I didn't feel as scared anymore. I found myself walking back along the shore to be closer to him and crouching down again to talk to him. I had things I needed to ask him. But I still don't really understand, I said. You said you'd come here to talk to me, didn't you? That means you didn't actually get lost at all, did you? No, I didn't get lost, he said. Whales don't get lost. Well, not that often anyway. We tell each other where we are all the time and what's going on all around the world. What we see, we share. So each and every one of us has a kind of map of the oceans, all the mountains, all the valleys under the seas, all the rivers and creeks, and all the coast of every continent, and every island and every rock. It's inside our heads. We grow up learning it, and that's why we don't get lost. He paused for a while, puffing hard through his blowhole. Talking was exhausting for him, I could see that. But we do get tired, he went on, and we get too old, and we get sick, just like people do. We've got a lot more in common with people than you know. We've got this earth in common for a start. And that's why I've come all this way to talk to you. We don't just share it with whales, but with every living thing, every people too. I've come to help you save yourself before it's too late. Because if you save yourself, then you'll be saving us too. It's like Grandfather said, we can't survive without you, and you can't survive without us. I didn't have a clue what he was on about, but I didn't dare say so. But I felt his eyes searching my thoughts. You don't really know what I'm talking about, do you? I shook my head. Then I think the best thing I could do is to tell you about Grandfather, because it all began with Grandfather. When I was little, Grandfather was always going off on his travels, voyages of discovery, he called them. All over the world he went. We hardly ever saw him. Sometimes he was away for so long, we thought he'd never be coming back. He wasn't all good at keeping in touch either. He was a sort of adventurer, my grandfather, an explorer. He liked to go places where no whale had ever been before. Then one day, it was some time ago now, when I was quite a little fellow, he came back from his travels and told us an amazing story. Ever since I heard that story, I dreamed of going where Grandfather had gone, of seeing what he had seen. Grandfather had gone off to explore an unknown river, to follow it inland as far as he could go. No other whale had ever dared go there before, as far as anyone knew. All he knew was this river was that a couple of narwhals had been beached there at the mouth of the river a long time ago. They never made it back out to sea. The warning had gone all over the oceans, and that is why whales had avoided this river ever since. It took a while for Grandfather to find it, but when he did, he just kept swimming. On and on he swam, right to the middle of the biggest city he'd ever seen. It was teeming with life. Everywhere he looked, there were great cranes leaning out over the river and towering wharves and busy docks. Everywhere there were boats and barges. He saw cars and trains and great red buses. And at night there were lights so bright that the whole sky was bright with them. It was a magical city, a place of bridges and towers and spires, and everywhere there were people and crowds of them, more than he'd ever seen before, more than he'd ever imagined there could be. He wanted to stay longer, to explore further upstream, to discover more. It was a wonderful place. But Grandfather knew the dangers. It was dangerous too. The further upriver he swam, the shallower the waters around him was becoming. There were boats and barges everywhere, and he knew that if he wasn't very careful, that one of them would run him down, and that would be death to him. When a propeller took a nick out of his fin, he decided it was time to leave, and besides, he was weak and hungry by that time. He knew he couldn't go on any further. So he turned around and tried to swim back the way he'd come, back out to sea. But that was when he found that the tide was going down fast. He was having to keep in the deep channels. But so were the boats and the barges, of course. There was danger all around him. He was so busy looking out for the boats that he didn't notice how shallow the water was getting around him. And Grandfather knew, as all whales do, just how easy it is to get yourself stranded. He always said it was his own fault if he got stranded. He lost concentration. But Grandfather got lucky. Some children saw him floundering there in the shallows and came running into the river to help him. They helped him back into the water and stayed with him till he was sure that he would be all right again. They saved his life, those children, and he never forgot it. When you get there, find a child, he told me, because children are kind, and they'll help you, they'll listen, and they'll believe you. So you see, it was only because of those children that my grandfather managed to find his way back into the open sea again and come back and tell us his story. That was when I noticed that all the birds were back again, the egrets too on his buoy out on the river. They'd all gathered nearby. There were pigeons and blackbirds perching on the trees behind me. And on the shore, not far away from me, was a beady-eyed heron. There were a family of ducks bobbing around on the river and a couple of cormorants amongst them, all looking at the whale, but none of them too close. And like me, they were listening. Even the trees seemed to be listening. The whale spoke again. Grandfather told me exactly how to get here, just how many days south I had to swim. He said that I had to look out for the fishing boats and the nets too, and not to hug the coastline, because that's where there were always more boats out. He warned me about the currents and the tides, and he told me about the deep channels in the river, and not to show myself until I had to. I mustn't stay too long. I mustn't swim too far up the river. I mustn't go any further than I had to. He told me, just like I did when you were a child, that'll be far enough. And when you find him, tell him what I've told you, what the whales all know, and what people refuse to understand. Tell him it's our last chance and their last chance, and you must make sure it's a child you tell. The old ones are greedy, have hard hearts and closed minds, or they would not have done what they have done. They're too old to listen and too old to change. The young ones will listen and they will change too. They'll understand. Just like they saved me, they can save the world. If they know, they will want to put it right. I know they will. They just need telling. And you will have to do this. You need to tell them. That's what Grandfather told me. So that's why I found you, and that's why I've come. That was when I saw he was drifting closer and closer to the shore again, and I was just about to warn him. And he must have realised the danger himself, because suddenly his tail began to thrash wildly in the shallows. The birds took off in a great flurry of panic, and the whale didn't stop flailing around till he found his way back into the deeper waters, where he dived down and vanished altogether. This time, I wasn't really that worried. I knew in my heart that he would come back, that he had much more to tell me. All the same, he was gone a long while. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I could read on and on and on, but if you've loved that book, I've got it in school. When you're all back, you can come and borrow it from me, or you can get it out from the library. It's a fabulous read, and I hope you want to find out what happens in the end of the book. Enjoy World Book Day, keep reading, and keep enjoying going off into these wonderful places that books take you. Okay, bye-bye.